Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is my very great pleasure to welcome you to the University of Sydney this evening. Before we begin the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built. As we share our knowledge, teaching, learning and research practices within this university, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever in the Aboriginal custodianship of country. My name is Louise BAUR. I'm a paediatrician and a professor in the discipline of Paediatrics and Child Health, and also in the School of Public Health at this university. I also happen to be a director of World Vision Australia. It is a great honour for the university to host the 28th in this national forum series called One Just World, sponsored by the Australian Government's International Development Agency, AusAid, in partnership with the International Women's Development Agency and World Vision Australia. These organisations are joined by a university partner in each city, and here in Sydney, I was going to say Australia, isn't that Sydney-centric? It's the University of Sydney through its Sydney Ideas program. One Just World is about providing a platform for ideas and conversations about important development issues and how these might be addressed, to enable you to talk directly with those involved in development, make your own suggestions and find out more about ways in which you can get involved. Health is important to us all, and in Australia we often take it for granted. But just a few hours' flight away in developing countries, millions and millions of people are suffering unnecessarily from diseases that we treat simply and effectively here in Australia. Worse still, many of them are the most vulnerable, young children and mothers. Why do we tolerate this inequity towards our fellow human beings living almost on our doorstep? And what are we going to do about it? This is one of the great injustices of our time. But I'm going to let our wonderful MC for tonight, Tracy Spicer, tell you more and introduce our guests. A familiar face to us all, Tracy is one of the most experienced and respected news presenters on Australian television, with a career spanning 20 years, encompassing news reading, documentary making, reporting and radio broadcasting. Renowned for her integrity, sharp mind and calm manner, Tracy is currently an international anchor with Sky News, and for 10 years was the face of National 10's National Weekend News and Midweek 11 a.m. News. However, Tracy has always been, first and foremost, a journalist. Among the highlights of her career are 2 documentaries on World Vision's work in Bangladesh and Kenya. In 2001, she produced a documentary for the World Wildlife Fund on the lack of fresh water sources in villages devastated by deforestation in Papua New Guinea, and the following year, a documentary on controversial radio personality Alan Jones. Tracy is outspoken about the modern-day pressures on women and men to juggle work and family, and is currently working with the union movement to educate women about their rights upon return from maternity leave. Tracy is an ambassador for World Vision and a passionate advocate for maternal and child health. We're really fortunate to have her here tonight. Please welcome Tracy.
Thank you, Professor BAUR, and thank you for those kind words, especially about having a calm mind. I didn't feel like that about an hour ago when I was juggling my 2 children aged 4 and 5, but I'll take it. As a proud World Vision ambassador, I'm delighted to be your MC at this special One Just World Forum to support World Vision's terrific global health campaign, Child Health Now. The title just says it all, doesn't it? This campaign was launched a year ago, as Professor BAUR mentioned, and we're here tonight to find out exactly what progress we've made and what we need to do now. Tonight we're asking the question, why? Why, with all the resources at our disposal, are more than 8 million children under the age of 5 dying each year from disease? Why does 1 in every 12 children in a country like Cambodia, for example, die before their 5th birthday? Why is this allowed to happen? Many die from preventable causes: malaria, pneumonia, diarrhoea, the list goes on. Through the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, wealthy countries like Australia promise to tackle this situation. We all have a moral responsibility to help, and I think you all agree by coming on tonight, you're showing your commitment to this cause, and I thank you for coming along. Australia has made some progress, but much, much more needs to be done. We know that 2/3 of these deaths, a full 2/3, could be prevented within 5 years. The solutions are simple, and importantly, when you're speaking on the ground of a capitalist society, the costs are low. Breastfeeding, improved maternal health, clean water, those things can save lives right now. What's missing? Well, we're not working together. Poor communities, international organisations, governments and people in developed countries like Australia all need to join forces to tackle this shocking violation of children's rights and to stop children from dying. It can be done, but we need your help. Tonight, we'll be joined by the New South Wales Governor, Her Excellency Professor Marie Bashir, from the CEO of World Vision Australia, Tim Costello, and from East Timor, Rosaria Martins de CRUZ, among many others who've joined us here tonight. Our keynote speaker is Michael DIBLEY, Associate Professor in International Public Health at the Sydney School of Public Health here at the university. Michael trained as a paediatrician, but early in his career changed direction and undertook further study at the US Centre for Disease Control to become an epidemiologist. Over the past 15 years, the Associate Professor has conducted technical consultancies related to child health and nutrition for UNICEF, the WHO, the World Bank, AusAid, USAID, Japan International Cooperation Agency, and the Netherlands government in Southeast and East Asia, including Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Vietnam, China, the Democratic Republic of Korea, India and Thailand. His current work is mainly in South Asia and focuses on how to prevent child undernutrition through improved infant and young child feeding. Would you please give a warm welcome to Michael DIBLEY.
Well, thanks, Tracy, for the introduction, and I'd also like to extend my thanks to the organisers of this forum for giving me the opportunity to talk to you, and I'd also like to extend my thanks to all the audience. I'm really impressed at the number of people who've come here after work to join in and think about this problem today. So I'm not going to talk a lot about details of science today. So if you come here thinking you were going to hear me talk a lot about statistics and complicated studies, rather I'm going to talk about my stories about how I came to be involved in international child health, a little bit about what I've learnt along the way, and about how best to try to achieve that goal of health for children around the world. And why I remain committed to trying to improve child health globally, and something about, touch on a little bit about what I'm doing now. So how did I get to be involved in issues about international child health? I think you've got to imagine now, you have to imagine a young man who had long hair down to his shoulders and was very eager. I was a medical student in 1975 here at the University of Sydney, and my professor of paediatrics at the time was very keen for students in the faculty to get some experience internationally. And he asked me if I was interested in doing what we called an unallocated term, where we spent a period of about 4 to 5 months working somewhere else. And he managed to arrange for me and 3 other of my colleagues in medical school at the time to go to the children's ward in the Erlangga Hospital in Surabaya in Indonesia. It was a considerably different Indonesia to what you might experience now. I can remember vividly arriving in Denpasar and walking from the plane across to the customs and immigration section, which was a large tin shed. So if you're used to coming into Bali now on your holidays, it's pretty much the same place where the tin shed used to be, but it's certainly very different. So what happened when I went to this children's hospital in Surabaya in 1975? Well, I was shocked by the things that I saw, things that I'd never seen in any sort of clinical practice in Australia. I, every day, saw children who came into the ward who had a variety of these diseases that I'd read about in medical textbooks, but I almost didn't think they existed. So I saw every day children who had diphtheria, children who had tetanus, children who had severe measles, children with severe malnutrition, children with severe diarrhea and cholera, children with TB. I think that amongst the most distressing cases for me were the children who came in with diphtheria. For those of you who may just sort of vaguely know about this disease, it's a contagious disease and it's spread by physical contact and by breathing aerosolized sort of secretions from infected individuals. And it's an infection in the upper part of the airway, and it's caused by a bacteria. And it starts with a sore throat and a fever. And if it gets severe enough, the child will get a swollen neck. And what happens in the upper part of the airway is a scab forms inside. And so these children are at risk of dying as the disease progresses from suffocating, because that membrane within their airway may dislodge, or because of the toxin that's produced by the bacteria, which can damage the heart muscle and can damage nerves that are important to the function of a whole variety of muscles around the body. And so we would have seen perhaps 4 or 5 children every day come in with this, and every day there would be 1 or 2 children who died of diphtheria in the ward. And I guess that what really struck me was that there was nothing much we could do. It was a very resource-poor setting at that time, and so we used to do an inspection of the membranes on the diphtheria ward with wooden spatulas that were re-sterilised and used the next day. Children, we didn't have anything to alleviate the problem if the child had an obstruction. So there wasn't equipment or supplies to do a tracheostomy, that is just an incision in the airway to ensure that the child could continue to breathe. So if the membrane dislodged, this child died. So that was very confronting. Another case that I remember that was very confronting was a child who came in, about 3-year-old boy, who had very severe measles. And measles is a virus that affects a whole part of many different parts of the body, and it can lead to pneumonia and diarrhea, and can even lead to an inflammation of the lining of the brain. The thing that happened with this child was within 24 hours of coming in, the child had ulceration on the eyes and was blind the next morning because of vitamin A deficiency. And that was just terribly disturbing. So there were these very confronting experiences every day of children who were very sick, and we were in a situation where simply there wasn't much to do. There was just not many resources that we could apply to solve these problems. Another thing that was really disturbing for me was that the families would bring in the children, and we would make a diagnosis. And in some instances, we had some drugs and some things that we could start to treat the child. But to continue the treatment, we wrote a script, and the parents would then have to go out of the hospital to the pharmacy to buy the drugs to treat the child. If the family was very poor, this was a great stress. They would have to go home and contact their wider network of families to see if they could get the money. Perhaps they had to borrow some money, and then they would come back and they would buy the drugs and bring it to us, and we would be able to administer them. If they couldn't do that, there was nothing we could do for these children. So that was very distressing for us as Australian medical students. we saw that it was also distressing for our Indonesian colleagues. And it was very distressing for the families who were struggling with the fact that their child was very ill and that they were unable to help resolve the problem. So out of this experience, which was really just changed my horizon and thinking about these things, I really learned that it was very hard to treat children who are severely ill. It's extremely difficult to do that when they're malnourished as well, and if you don't have many resources. Now remember, all of these things happened 35 years ago. It worries me that I can tell stories of 35 years ago. But at that time in Indonesia, for every 1,000 children who were born alive, 135 died before the age of 5. And if you compare that with Australia, where out of every 1,000 children who were born, maybe less than 5 would die. Maybe it was slightly higher back in 1975, but not by more than 1 or 2. So it was a huge difference. I do remember one other thing that happened during the time. I mean, there were many other things that happened, but I do remember one of the things was that I was taken during the visit to one of what was called the first community health centres in East Java province. And I'll come back to that a little bit in a while. So what have I learned along the way about how to best to achieve child health? And I might reflect on what happened in 1980 when I came back to the same hospital that I'd been in 5 years before. And I met my professor of paediatrics from the children's hospital there, and he took me on a ward round. And there were some remarkable changes. One of the changes was that there were virtually no children with diphtheria. And he complained to me bitterly, how am I going to teach paediatrics to my students? I don't have any cases of diphtheria. And I was thinking, this is a triumph, this is great. I would add an aside now, in Indonesia, by 1985, the number of deaths per 1,000 of live birth of children under 5 has now dropped to about 100. So what do you think happened in that 5-year period? Well, in 1974, the World Health Organization initiated a program called the Expanded Program on Immunization. And the objective was to vaccinate children throughout the world. So they started out with 4 vaccines. I think they started out with BCG, which is to protect against tetanus, TB, and then a combined vaccine that prevented against diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough. So really what had happened was most probably the hospital drained populations that had more access. Remember that community health centre was started, and that was just enough to tip the balance. That prevention was enough to reduce these number of children who were having this really terrible disease. So I guess it was a dramatic lesson for me that prevention was better than cure, and that I better be thinking about how do you prevent these children from becoming so severely ill. Actually, it's more subtle than prevention alone, because you really need a combination of prevention where it's possible, but also better ways of managing children who are ill. So what are the sorts of prevention tools that we have available for improving child health? And we've mentioned, several have been mentioned at all. There's a range of vaccines that are available now, all of the traditional child vaccines. There are new ones against a number of more serious infections that lead to meningitis or that lead to different types of pneumonia. And there is even now a vaccine that helps prevent a common type of childhood diarrhea. There are things that we can do with micronutrient supplements. So children who are deficient in vitamin A are much more susceptible to infections, and that's something else we can do. We can improve water and sanitation. So I'm sort of moving out into a more general thing, and that can be really important in preventing children from getting diarrhea in the first place. We can educate women, and then there's a profound effect in terms of the capacity of the family to be able to utilise services, to understand what they may mean, and to better understand how to protect the health of the woman's children. So there are all of those things we can do. What about the better clinical management of ill children? Well, we have made significant advances in there. One of the big breakthroughs was discovering oral rehydration solution. So they're a simple mixture of salt and sugar that maximizes the absorption of water. And the trick here was, yes, it was first established and people started to use it in clinics as a way of treating the dehydration that kills children with diarrhea. But the real trick was to learn or realize that you could train millions of mothers around the world to start this treatment at home to prevent the child from becoming very severely ill. And I remember in the early 1980s, an organisation in Bangladesh called the Bangladesh Real Advancement Council, or BRAC now, running a program where they trained millions of mothers across the country how to do this. And their real trick was that they rewarded the trainers by going and doing an evaluation of their work 6 weeks after they trained the mothers, and they paid them a bonus if more than 80% of the mothers could correctly make up the rehydration solution. And that led the trainers, who were often secondary level trained, educated people from the local community, to think up the most creative ideas and ways on how to educate women and to make sure that they remembered how to do this. So that program, which was one of the important ones that demonstrated that, yes, we can do this on a wide scale. We brought many of these different treatment protocols for better management of children with pneumonia, management of children with diarrhea, with children with fever and malaria, all together, and now we have an integrated approach which has been implemented in many countries around the world, so that instead of thinking about children who are ill in these different little categories, we just see it globally. I think the other thing that's been important in Indonesia was, in terms of how to make all of this work, was the investments that the government has made over the years in bringing services to the community. So yes, back in 1975, I saw the first community health centre, and by the mid-1980s, there were community health centres across the country, one for about every 30,000 of population. But they still found that people didn't access the services, so they created an outreach program where they created village health posts, and they got village women to volunteer and to be trained, and every month they would get all the women who had the children together, and the people from the community health services, the midwives, the vaccinators, the nurses would come and run these series of integrated clinics in the community. So did it work in Indonesia? Well, remember I said in 1975 it was 135 out of every 1,000 children dying. By 1990 it had dropped to 97. By 1995 it had dropped to 58 out of every 1,000. And by 2005, I'm very pleased to say it's dropped to 44. It's still way, way higher than in Australia, but when you think about where the situation was back in 1975. And again, there are other things that came along the way. One of the important things was that the Indonesian government invested in training midwives, thousands of midwives in the mid-1990s to ensure that every village had a midwife, and that would increase the likelihood that women would get antenatal care and appropriate care at the time of delivery. So yeah, a lot's been done, and I think what the story out of Indonesia is telling us that it can be done, and still more can be done if we focus our energies internationally on this. So what's my current work? Well, I did live in Indonesia for 10 years, and I was very engaged in that, and I've seen a lot of progress. I came back to Australia, and I just took a broader look at the world, and I realised that, in fact, where most of the malnourished children of the world live is, in fact, a bit further west. In South Asia, above and by far the largest percentage of children who are undernourished. India, partly because of its large population, has something like 60 million children who are undernourished, 8 million who are severely, acutely malnourished. And a large part of this burden of malnutrition that is still present in South Asia relates to inappropriate patterns of feeding children. So children often don't get the opportunity to initiate breastfeeding early. We recommend that all babies, newborn babies, get on the breast within the first hour. But if you deliver at home and you're assisted by your family and a traditional birth attendant, there are many rituals that the baby and the mother has to go through. So the baby gets taken out and washed, mustard oil gets rubbed in the hair, the child is fed some honey to make sure that the voice is sweet. So there's many things that go on. And then there's traditional beliefs that the birth attendant may say to the mother, well, really, your milk won't come down for 3 days. And so all of this delays this early initiation and getting the first breast milk, which is a very protective part of the breast milk that helps prevent deaths. Up to about 1/5 of the deaths in the neonatal period could be prevented if women would initiate breastfeeding in the first hour after life. Other problems include inappropriate ways of feeding children with complementary feeds when they start to get a little bit older. And so what we've found is that people often have programs that focus on one part of this. So they might have some attention paid to trying to get women to initiate breastfeeding early. Or they may be trying to encourage women to exclusively breastfeed. That is, in the first 6 months, just give breastfeeds alone. Or they may have some program to try and encourage mothers to give more energy-dense foods to children as they start to eat solids or semi-solid foods. But what we're doing now in Bangladesh is we're trying to integrate all of those messages and train local women to deliver them so that they start working with the mother during pregnancy and they continue to meet with her on a regular period over the first year of life. And we want to see if by integrating all of these messages and having them delivered by a local woman will in fact help us accelerate the reductions in undernutrition that are urgently needed in that part of the world. I'd last to end by just reflecting on a statement by Neil Postman in a book on the disappearance of childhood. And he says that children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see. So just thinking about that, one of these living messages, I suppose part of it is the sorts of values that we hope that children will acquire from their parents and their families and their society, and that they'll carry forward and use as some sort of compass to guide them through life and through all the difficult decisions they may have to confront. I think part of it is education, and that the education they get from their families and from wider, from schools and society that will help them deal not only with problems in terms of simple daily living problems, but also with more complex problems. And so we can't expect children to be these living messages if they die. We can't expect children to acquire that information and carry it forward to be able to deal with all the complex problems in the future if they're malnourished or if they have a childhood that's full of repeated infections and illness. So I think we really need to realise that we have to act now. This is an issue that can't wait. We can't just let it slide by. We have to act now in order to protect our future and the future of this generation of children now. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Professor Michael DIBLEY, for speaking so eloquently about the boy who was blinded by measles, the women who face challenges with something as simple as breastfeeding because of rituals and customs, and also for your inspiring stories from Bangladesh to Indonesia. We thank you. And now reporting from Malawi, here's Packed to the Rafters star Rebecca Gibney.
Okay, so here we are in Malawi. I thought before we left that maybe we should put together some little kits of healthcare stuff. We're actually here to investigate maternal health in Malawi, and I thought while we are visiting some of the healthcare centres that we might take some of the essentials that in Australia we take for granted, things like paracetamol, antiseptic wipes, soap, thermometers, Band-Aids, again, so many infections are caused by lack of care, antiseptic wipes and band-aids. Simple, we have them in Australia. Here, it's not so common. So I'm going to put together a few bags. Well, day one, we're on the road in Malawi, very excited, and we have with us Regina, and Regina is the Health and Nutrition Manager for World Vision. Yes. Can you tell me what some of the maternal child health issues that you see here in Malawi?
Here in Malawi, we see what worries us most is nutritional deficiencies, because when a mother is malnourished, normally we see the cycle going on. The child also becomes malnourished. We have very high mortality rates. For children, we are, I can't remember exactly, but for under 5 mortalities, we are above 100. And for infant mortalities, we are around 74.
And per how many births?
Per 1,000 births.
So every 1,000 children that are born, 100 will die?
Yes, over 100. I think it's 134.
That's just...
Yeah.
Can you explain where we're going today?
Today we are going to DOA. We call it DOA.
DOA.
D-O-W-A. This is a district hospital.
Have a look?
Yeah, no problem.
So Dan, can you tell me, this healthcare centre, how many people do you look after in this healthcare centre? How big is the district?
Yeah, for the population is 15,996.
And you look after all of them?
That's it.
Okay. So in a day, how many people would you see?
For the OPD, at least an average 120.
120 people. How many people have you seen this morning?
This morning about 80.
About 80 people. And
Yes.
you're the only doctor here?
No, of course we have 3 nurses.
3 nurses, and you're a midwife?
Yes.
So what happens in here, Dan?
In fact, for example, maybe the woman is 9 months. So we advise them to come here to wait labor.
So they wait in this room?
Yeah, in this room, of course.
And what do they do?
For the only, maybe they have their kitchen or their mats.
So they sleep here?
They sleep here. If labor starts, then definitely we take them into the labor ward.
And we can see that, we can go into there as well. And how many women do you have in here at the moment?
So far there are 26 antenatal.
26?
Yes.
And they are all waiting to give birth?
That's it.
This is the labour ward. You only have 2 beds?
Yes.
And if more than 2 women come in here, they give birth on the floor?
That's very true.
And you have no electricity?
We don't.
So at night time, how do you light?
Yeah, sometimes we have a very small solar panel, but as time goes, it goes off. Then we use sometimes a lamp, or else if the fuel is not there, we use a torch or a candle.
A torch?
To conduct a delivery. So it's very difficult.
Okay, and you have no running water either?
Sometimes the woman, maybe who have just given birth, the guardians will go maybe about 2 kilometers away from this place to draw water, and then...
And they fill it up in here?
Yeah. When we want to use the water, we definitely use this water.
Okay.
Maybe after delivery, when we want to wash hands, we use the very same one, not from the taps.
No.
But from that...
Because the taps aren't working?
They're not.
And all you need is a pump to make the taps work?
That's it.
How much is a pump?
Oh, we don't know.
Okay. Did you deliver this baby?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, in the morning hours.
This morning?
Yes.
Oh, this baby was just born this morning.
Oh,
no, stay. Is this a little boy or a little girl?
Oh, come on.
Oh, he's been taken from his mama. Oh.
Yes. Boy?
Girl?
Yeah, it's a
little boy?
It's a boy.
Was this your first baby?
The 3rd boy.
A 3rd boy?
Yes.
Ah, he's beautiful. Did she have to travel far?
Almost 13 kilometers from this
13 kilometers. Yeah. And she walked, or she was here already, or did she walk when the labour started?
Yeah, she walked, and then she was here for antenatal waiting in labor. But she
here,
walked
right.
when she was coming from home.
Okay. Oh, he's beautiful.
Good.
And have you ever had a situation where there are too many women giving birth?
Yes.
Where do they go then?
Definitely, we always keep them here.
Keep them here?
Yeah.
So you just find room somewhere to
That's
put
it.
them?
Yeah.
And what would you like to see happen to the conditions here? How would you like to see them improved?
Maybe on the condition of the accommodation, but at least we should need to have the labor hall that is a little bit bigger. Maybe can accommodate maybe 10 beds, so that at least by the end of the day, we can conduct maybe 10 patients.
Visiting the hospital today and meeting people like Violet and Dan, who are just so courageous and so incredibly good-humoured considering what they have to deal with on a daily basis. The fact that Dan saw 100 patients before lunchtime in itself is just awe-inspiring. That he delivered 7 babies in the night and then another 2 in the morning. He didn't sleep, and yet he was still so enthusiastic and showing the conditions that he's working in. Having a child myself, I'm saddened but inspired, and I really want to try and do as much as I can to help.
Incredible, isn't it? No running water, no electricity in a delivery ward, a woman walking 13 kilometres to give birth, just extraordinary. Our next guest needs little introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. A remarkable Australian, he's even outlasted his brother in public life. Tim Costello is Chief Executive of World Vision Australia and one of our leading voices, as I'm sure you all know, on social justice. He's taken a prominent role in national debate on many issues, including gambling, urban poverty, substance abuse, homelessness, reconciliation. Tim's been instrumental in keeping the issues surrounding global poverty, in particular, on the national agenda since 2004 when he joined World Vision Australia. His passion for alleviating the suffering of the poor communities in the developing world came to the fore after the 2004 tsunami. His activism and leadership, and of course the generosity of so many Australians, helped World Vision Australia raise more than $100 million for tsunami relief. Tim also played a prominent role in the Make Poverty History campaign, and in April 2008 he chaired the Strengthening Communities, Supporting Families and Social Inclusion Committee of the Australian Government's 2020 Summit. He is an officer of the Order of Australia and he's just returned from Los Angeles via India. Would you please welcome the extraordinary Tim Costello.
Well, thank you, Tracy, for that introduction. It's pretty much as I wrote it, really. I want to thank all of you for being here, for being passionate about one just world. And I need not underscore that all of us have a whole history of stories told to us by our own mothers about birth, that it is the most fundamental human fact. And because we're bringing together that fundamental human fact and saying, given that in Australia there's 4 or 5 per 1,000 kids that die, and just an hour and a half's flight from Darwin in East Timor, and we're going to be hearing about that from Sue and Rosario soon, the figure's up around 70 children that die per 1,000. It really raises the question, what is the moral significance of the East Timor Sea? That here we actually have our own birth stories, safety, services, and so close, a near neighbour, it is so utterly different. Which brings us back to really a commitment to saying whatever we can do to build one just world on this issue is incredibly important. Having mentioned birth stories, my first child was born in Switzerland, and watching another culture and the story there, and listening to our previous speaker, it caused a flashback. It happened not to be in a developing country, but in Switzerland, where my wife and I were studying, and 6 weeks before the birth of our child, my wife had an ultrasound. We didn't want to know, but we were told by the doctor, unsolicited, that we were having a boy. So this was pretty easy to organise. We had cut out English newspaper headlines because Prince William had been born to die in 1982, just a few weeks earlier. Headlines, it's a boy. Mocked up something to send back home, had a name chosen, only had to write in the weight. We're organised. Choosing the name was important because in Switzerland, before you go in for birth, by Swiss law, you must list a boy's name and a girl's name. And if you're Swiss, they give you a prescribed list of names you've got to choose from. So we had this nailed. We had a boy's name. My wife went into labour. Now, I have to say that I hadn't gone to any of the birth classes. And the Swiss-German doctor's English was pretty bad, and my wife and I didn't speak much German, certainly at that stage. I was surprised that the doctor kept shouting at my wife, "Pull, pull." Even that confused me. I said, "Do you mean push?" He said, "Jawohl, push." They mean the same, don't they? Here was the first experience that this is very different. After a long labour, out came this baby, and my wife literally was out of it, and weekly as this baby came out, she said to me, "It's a boy, isn't it, Tim?" Now, I was a lawyer by training. I hadn't been to birth classes. I looked at this baby, and I have to say to my embarrassment, something in my brain just paralysed and snapped. I literally looked. I couldn't figure this out, and I said, "Doctor, what is this?" I trusted doctors. I didn't think they made mistakes. He muttered something about doctors getting it wrong, and then they weighed our daughter, and she weighed about 4.5 kilos, over 10 pounds. The Swiss doctor who got the gender wrong, his English wrong, hadn't predicted this size, and he looked at me really puzzled, and he said, "Are all Australians this big?" I felt like saying, "No, we throw these ones back." And then, of course, the pressure. We hadn't chosen a girl's name. And my wife out of it, I was left alone to choose our daughter's name. Her name was Claire. No consultation. It took my wife a little time to agree with the name, but I'd already registered it. Well, we all have birth stories, but we're here today to say in one just world, the birth stories should actually have some justice, some sense of the dignity and rights that every human should enjoy. It was almost a year ago to the day that we launched the global advocacy campaign, Child Health Now. And it was really addressing this question, why 8 million children die before they reach the age of 5. That's 22,000 children every day, one child every 3 seconds. Before you feel hopeless, do realise that over the last 2 decades, we have reduced the number of daily deaths by 35%. In fact, just 2 years ago, UNICEF's figures, or 2.5 years ago, was 30,000 kids dying each day. Now 22,000. We are making progress, but it is still extraordinary that this many children die each day. And they die from preventable causes, from complications at birth, pneumonia, diarrhoea, malaria, HIV/AIDS. And of course, you've heard that malnutrition is the underlying cause in 1/3 of all child deaths. So, we are still witnessing the greatest child rights violations of our time. Thus, Child Health Now, linking our story and our kids' story to this should be a right every child, every mother has in our world. 340,000 women still die in pregnancy around the world. It isn't surprising when you consider that 40% of mothers in the developing world still give birth without a skilled attendant like a midwife there to assist them. And of course, a child whose mother dies, that child is 10 times more likely to die before the age of 5. I've just come from India, as Tracy said, via LA, speaking at a global trafficking conference there. In India, I was speaking to this fantastic rally World Vision India had organised, 10,000 people at it in Chennai, focusing on Child Health Now. And I asked the question, who knows the batting average of Sachin Tendulkar? For those who don't know, he's an Indian Test cricket star. Every person there knew his average was 56.7. 1 billion Indians follow cricket. I asked, How many children die in India each day? Very few knew the answer. 5,000 children die each day. I pointed out this anomaly. How many know the name of the Indian Test cricket captain? They all know Mahendra Dhoni. But that 1,000 children die each day in India from diarrhoea, very few people knew. Just saying, if these are your children, this should be front of mind. And we've heard the extraordinary struggle in India, which still has, for one nation, almost as many absolutely poor as the whole continent of Africa. And it comes as a bit of a shock. 500 million trying to live on less than $1.25 a day in Africa, about 420 million in India. Well, Child Health Now campaign is really focusing on the Millennium Development Goals 4 and 5. 4 is to reduce child deaths by 2/3 by 2015. And as I've said, we've seen under 5 child deaths decline by 35% in the last 2 decades. We know that simple, cost-effective, proven solutions exist at family and community levels that could reduce that child death rate by 65% and maternal deaths by 80%. Very simple things that you've heard alluded to. Improved nutrition, exclusive breastfeeding. Babies who are breastfed are 6 times less likely to die than those who are not. You've heard about oral rehydration, especially in areas where water quality and sanitation levels are poor. Bed nets to protect against mosquitoes. Skilled birth attendants, particularly midwives. Immunisation you've heard about. So we know what to do. And in launching this campaign, it really is an appeal to say to the world, this is so fundamental. We want to galvanise opinion and imagination and political will to do what we know we can do, what works. So, since we've launched this campaign, working with governments and poor communities, particularly in the lead up to the federal election, where we lobbied hard on maternal and child health, developing briefings for the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, senior AusAid staff, we've actually seen some progress. The progress in terms of success, at least here, is a bipartisan agreement that our overseas development aid should be lifted from 0.34%, 34 cents in every $100, as it is at the moment, to 0.5%, 50 cents in every $100 by 2015. And to push the government to make baby steps toward 0.7%, their promised agreement to the rest of the world, which Scandinavian countries and Netherlands are already at, which Britain, by the way, even under a Tory government, slashing and burning with terrible economic conditions, and I've also been in London on this trip, and it is economically depressed, a Tory government promised, when it slashed and burned, to ring-fence aid. They're already at 0.5%. They will be at 0.7% by 2013. Here, Australia avoided the recession, is in the region where most of the world's poor live, and still way back at 0.34%. You can see why we need your voice to campaign. Without going through all the achievements, let me just say that at the Millennium Development Summit in New York just gone, Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd announced we would commit $1.6 billion over the next 5 years, focusing on Southeast Asia and the Pacific, expanding family planning, vaccination services, more skilled health workers. We think that's really significant. I might say that World Vision International, all of the World Vision together, invest $1.5 billion on maternal and child health over the next 5 years, so we match already what the Australian government is promising. Well, these are achievements, but we have a long way to go. The challenge that we invite you to be part of is to give us your voice, to call on the Australian government to prioritise health by allocating $1 in every $5 of Australia's aid budget to health-focused aid by 2012. At the moment, only 14% of Australia's aid budget, $1 in every 7, is allocated to health. We believe that is not enough. And while there is some progress here, We think your voice on that issue is incredibly important. Let me just finish by saying I think to be part of what this lecture series is called One Just World is fundamentally important to living out consequentially our deepest values and heart instincts. I, for whatever reason, have always had a commitment to justice. People often ask me where did it begin, and since my brother was mentioned, I say a little tongue-in-cheek, but I also am serious. I think it began through sharing a bedroom with my brother for 17 years. When you share a bedroom, you have your squabbles. Often my father would be woken up on a weekend by us early. He would walk in irate. He's a great father. He's 91. He's a wonderful father. But I do remember whenever he came in when we were having a fight, he would say the same thing. He would say, I don't care who started this. I'm not interested in the story. I don't want to hear about blame. I'm going to punish you both. That's when I got interested in justice. I reckon Peter started it most of the time. Well, wherever your instinct and story from justice comes from, One Just World, having heard, I'm sure, your own birth story and been there with your own kids, invite you to say, yes, count on my voice. I'm going to be part of this campaign, Child Health Now. We actually can build a One Just World. We know how to do it. We need the political will to keep the march continuing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for reminding us of all the wonderful successes of World Vision in the past many years and also the road ahead, the many more achievements that will be made. And for sharing some of those personal stories. I love the sibling rivalry one. That sounded like my house this afternoon. We're now going to hear from two experts who've dealt firsthand with the issues of child and maternal health in developing countries. A special welcome to Australia for Rosaria Martins de CRUZ, Director of HIAM Health in Timor-Leste. Born and raised in East Timor, Rosaria has dedicated her life to the socially disadvantaged and really the poorest of the poor. As a young girl, she was disturbed by the injustices and violence resulting from the conflict in the region and so began a career in public health. She's worked in a private clinic in Dar, with the Christian Brothers at the Edmund Rise Centre, as a doctor with the Interfet in Timor-Leste and as a volunteer for the Dili National Hospital. In 2004, Rosaria established HIAM Health, Hamatuk Ita Azuda Malu, which means together we help each other, to reduce high infant and maternal mortality rates. Sue NDWALA is World Vision Australia's maternal and child health advisor. Sue is a consultant midwife with 20 years' experience. She holds qualifications in nursing, midwifery, child health and sexual health and education. Her work has taken her to many places, including Ethiopia, Southern Sudan and East Timor. Her passion is to raise the capacity for rural communities in developing countries to improve maternal, newborn and infant health. Sue returned to Australia in 2008 following 18 months in East Timor managing a remote area maternal and child health project. Would you please welcome Sue and Rosaria? Welcome, ladies, and first of all, thanks for coming along and being so willing to share your stories because they are quite extraordinary. We only have a limited amount of time, so let's get stuck into it. First of all, Rosaria, how many children are malnourished in your country?
Thank you very much. Approximately 200,000 children under 5 in Timor-Leste. More than 100,000 children it's malnourished.
That is incredible when you think about how small your country is. I mean, the population's barely 1 million.
This is affected by lack of education, the lack of health education, and balanced diet. Also, our economy, poor of economy, income from our country per day is 50 cents. The access to the health facility, lack access to the health facility. The lack of water, limited also with hygiene and sanitation, and our traditional belief.
We spoke earlier, you mentioned nutrition just then, about white rice. Tell us about the effect that white rice has had on the diets of people in Timor-Leste.
I will tell you about Timor-Leste history. During Indonesian occupied to 24 years in Timor-Leste, Timor-Leste, before our costumes, we have a food traditional. We have a rice, but our local rice, different with the white rice that now we eat. We have our traditional food we call corn, pumpkin, and beans. I have a history from my life. When I was a child, I saw my mom always cook. We call butterfly. It's corn, but not grinding. We use it, the wood to make powder, but not powder. And always my mom could mix with beans and pumpkin and the green vegetable. When I got to teenager, maybe I'm in the primary school, Indonesian come to our country in 1975 and try to introduce the white rice for Timor-Leste people to the population. So all Timor, it's habit. And we continue to eat the white rice until now. Wherever we go to Timor, you see in the street, always have a white sack rice stand in the road, like giving welcome to you. So this is the bad. Because Timor-Leste think that the white rice can be fit for the belly, make belly, it's full, but they don't understand the value from the food.
So there's a whole plate piled high with white rice, which is very nutritionally poor. So you wanted to speak a little bit about Pakistan before the floods and after the floods. Are the problems similar in Pakistan to what they are in Timor-Leste?
Yes, I think what we've heard already tonight from the other speakers, some of these issues, although there's very different contexts, are exactly the same. And Pakistan, unfortunately, doesn't have 1 million people. It has 176 million people. So it's a huge nation, but there are 23 million under 5 children, and there is equal, about 40% are also malnourished. Like Timor, 50% of all children under 5 are malnourished. Pakistan, close to the same. And on top of that, it's some incredible 32% are born malnourished. That's low birth weight. And I think Timor-Leste and your work has demonstrated very similar low birth weight numbers. So we're talking about populations who have suffering poverty, have problems with water, have problems with access to health services, have problems with education, which results in families and mothers not knowing what is the right thing to feed their child.
And diarrhoea is a huge problem, child diarrhoea in Pakistan, and it's incredibly difficult to treat.
Well, you're right and you're wrong. It's actually not difficult to treat. But it's an amazingly difficult problem at the moment because of the floods. So I'm sure you would say the same thing. Many children in Timor-Leste get diarrhoea because of poor water source and poor understandings of clean water. So they don't boil their water, they don't have any treatment tablets to put in their water, they take it from the river. It's the same in Pakistan. But now we've had this enormous flood, which I'm sure many of you are aware. It's one of the worst disasters in the world, and in fact probably worse than what we've seen from Haiti and the previous tsunami in terms of its impact. So at the moment, 20 million people have no home, no water, no sanitation, and are now returning as the floodwater goes down. And the watery diarrhoea is about 20% of everybody. But when you get watery diarrhoea in malnourished kids, you wipe off a whole set of their intestine, which we call that villi, which absorbs food and everything. And so their ability to manage that is really reduced. So they're getting the treatment now. So what's happened with a lot of NGOs in the world there to help them, they are getting that oral rehydration solution, but they're often not getting the clean water to go with it. So they've got this conundrum where you're teaching mothers to add that to the water, but they actually don't have any clean water. So there are still large numbers of children suffering from watery diarrhoea, dehydration, and dying from it.
The problems are complex and multi-layered, as we've touched on, as we heard earlier from Associate Professor Michael Dibley. Rosaria, you mentioned earlier about some superstitions and beliefs of some people that restrict them from doing the right thing when it comes to nutrition.
We talk about traditional belief or superstition for the Timor-Leste people. It's so high. Timor-Leste people, usually, mostly people living in the rural area, they have a traditional belief we call umalulik, or traditional house. It's a spirit animism in there. So when the child or wherever people, family sick, people doesn't have something in the head thinking that now I must take my family or my child to the health post. They don't thinking about that. Usually they go to Umalulik first, go to the spirit animist first, try to see something, what happened for my family, why my child is like that, or why my family is something happened like that. Living with this situation for maybe 1 week or 2 weeks, when the condition is so very bad, no results from this traditional belief, they take to the post-clinic. So when go to the post-clinic, something is late to them, already late. And what happened? It's die.
So what are you able to do at your centre, at HIAM Health, to help these women and these families?
Because Timor-Leste community learning by doing. If you stand and giving you information a half minutes to them and you just go away, leaving them, they don't understand. Because they're learning by doing, practical experience, it's very important for them. So HIAM Health tried to build the resident center. We call Malnutrition Rehabilitation and Education Center. Stabilized in Dili district, we're working with National Hospital. Timor-Leste have 1 national hospital and 4 referral hospital. We are working together with National Hospital. Patients come from the district with malnutrition complicated, stay in the hospital for treatment of complicated. So after treatment for complicated, the hospital referral to HIAM Center. They will stay in the HIAM Center more than 3 to 4 weeks with the family, with the parents. And our main focus is education. Education to change behavior. So we try to say, I say to you, learning by doing. They stay in there, learning by doing. HIAM staff, giving education for them, education about health, education about agriculture. We try to resolve the problem with home, kitchen, garden, education about how to improve the life.
That's interesting that you mentioned the home, kitchen, gardens, because I understand in some countries it's not the problem that there's not the food there. A lot of it is this cultural belief that perhaps the men should be having the protein and the women and the children get the slops.
Yeah, it's a custom a bit similar to what's already been mentioned here, in that a lot of families just don't understand nutrition, and so there is a pecking order, and men believe because they are the hard workers and they have the muscles and they have to do that work, that they have to eat the meat, and that the women, although they are the harder workers in many cultures, and Pakistan is one of those, where they would be working from morning to night in the fields, lugging the water, carrying very heavy loads on their heads, right through their pregnancies and their lactating period, when their nutritional needs are doubled, their caloric needs are incredibly high, and yet the man would still think that he is the most important person to be fed first. And so how do you change that? You have to work very slowly, and I think we've both discussed how important behavioural change is, in you don't just talk to women. And in a lot of development programs in the past, it's exactly what we all did. You talk to women about the problem, and they already know the problem. So we have to talk to the families. We need them to all understand. And so what Professor DIBLEY was talking about is the same in Bangladesh. We need to work at a community level. And you know what, it takes a long time to change those customs. We both know that. Rosaria knows that too. They visit regularly to see what happened to those children, and it does take families, sometimes even like 5 years of sustained effort, where the whole community understands something and then it changes. It's like the herd, you know, you can't change one family, you need the whole herd to start thinking about it, and then you'll have a change.
So what else is being done to help women and children? And is there a light at the end of the tunnel of all this?
Oh, definitely. I think what you've heard from the others, there's been an enormous change, and Timor-Leste is seeing a change. I'm sure you'd agree. I think we have seen an enormous impact of the Millennium Development Goals around the world for mothers and children, and we are just starting to see that they are going to have potentially a great impact. And if you look at Pakistan, they had been doing very well. They were nearly going to make their goal, and their goal was 43 deaths of children per 1,000 by 2015, and they were at 89 in the last data. So they were going to make it, and now we have a flood. So you can see what happens in communities when something disastrous happens, like conflict or flood. But I would love to ask Rosaria what she thinks about the problem of 50% of the kids of Timor-Leste are malnourished. What's the impact of that for her nation? Is there time to ask that question?
Yeah, what is the future for Timor-Leste, Rosaria?
If 50% of our children is malnutrition, exactly our country, the future, it's not to be same like Australia. I think all of you agree with what I said. Our country is the new in the world. We just independent 2002, UN giving for us. We get our referendum 1999. We're living with this bad situation on Indonesians occupied. So our dreams, together we want independence because we want our country same like you. We want all children smile like your children. But if 50% is malnutrition, I think our country will be bad in the future. The brain cannot connect in. Children go to school also when the teachers stand in the front and teach something to them. No, adapt. When come back to home, mother always asks what you're learning in the home. But in the school, maybe you just said one word. So I hope all Australian government, all population of Timor Australia is giving you attention to our country, help the children in there.
It is a shocking fact, isn't it, that if children don't get this nutrition in the first 2 years of life, it's not just their bodies that have stunted growth, it's their brains as well. And that will be with them for life. And that's why this first 1,000 days is so important.
Yeah, and I think it's been brought up by the others as well. So we now know that if a child has chronic malnutrition in the uterus and in the first 2 years of life, which is not addressed by effective breastfeeding and introducing the right food, then that brain will never really recover. So the child will remain short for life, and we see many short people in a lot of these nations. It's not just genetic, it's actually malnutrition. But secondly, yes, it actually shrivels the brain, and we know that in the medical world that has tested these children, they do not have the cognitive ability that they would have had. So it doesn't matter from then on if we can give them that extra food later, it may not make the impact on that child that was needed. So it's about the work that all of the agencies on development around the world in these countries with high mortality need to focus. It's about that first 1,000 days in the womb and the first 2 years of life.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you, Rosaria, for all your incredible work, your grassroots work at the coalface, and thank you for coming along and sharing your stories and being so inspiring, because it's great to know that although these problems are enormous, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you. Please put your hands together for Sue and Rosaria. Now gives me great pleasure to welcome a very special guest. Professor Marie Bashir was elected Chancellor of the University of Sydney in 2007. Born of Lebanese descent in Narandra in the Riverina district and educated at Sydney Girls High School, she gained her bachelor degrees in medicine and surgery in 1956 from this very university. She taught at the Universities of Sydney and New South Wales, increasingly working with children's services, psychiatry and mental health services, and Indigenous health programs. She was appointed Governor of New South Wales in 2001, the first woman to hold the position. At the time of her appointment, she was Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Sydney, Area Director of Mental Health Services for Central Sydney, and Senior Consultant to the Aboriginal Medical Service Redfern and the Aboriginal Medical Service of Kempsey. Professor Bashir's widespread interests include juvenile justice, research on adolescent depression, health in developing countries, education for health professionals, and new technologies for health service delivery. Would you please welcome Her Excellency, the Governor of New South Wales, Professor Marie Bashir.
Good evening, everyone. I am truly glad to be able to join you all for such a very special gathering. And forgive me arriving just now, but I've left early this morning to go to Dubbo because I had a long-standing engagement with all the children of that western region, a few thousand of them, including many, many young Aboriginal children who are doing extremely well, thriving with incredible support from the fine schools we have in that region. So it was most inspiring, and we can now, I hope, turn things around for other children all around the world. I know that we'd all agree that experiencing a 5th birthday is not a luxury for most children in Australia, but for millions of our children around the world, the reality of harsh poverty makes survival just to 5 a major challenge. In a country like East Timor, just a few hundred kilometres off our Australian shores, for every 1,000 children born there, 97 will die before the age of 5. And just to put that in perspective, Here in Australia, less than 5 children out of every 1,000 die before their 5th birthday, and we are constantly working to reduce that further. Tonight, I not only address you in my capacity as Chancellor of the University of Sydney and Governor, but as a medical graduate you've heard with a very long career, a privileged career in health, working particularly with young people, but as a woman, a mother and a grandmother of 6, in fact. And I know there's nothing worse for a parent or a grandparent than suddenly, in the night, a little one gets sick. So imagine the high anxiety that parents in some of the world's poorest countries face, where their children are going to experience those very long odds. So a sense of hopelessness then is overwhelming. And I'm sure that that sort of poverty, that sort of tragedy are the sorts of things that engender anger, an anger that might even cause someone to be drawn into terrorist activities. Well, we Australians simply cannot accept that reality of those innocent children being doomed to die so early in life, can we, without doing something about it? Because these children are not dying from a mystery disease. We do not need to find some miracle cure, because 40% of the children in such disadvantaged regions of the world are dying from 2 diseases, for the most part, pneumonia and diarrhoea. We already know how to treat them successfully. What we're talking about in terms of the deficit is basic health care at the family and community level. That's what will save the lives of 6 million innocent children each year. This is surely a human right. Diarrhoea kills 1.5 million children every year alone. But oral rehydration, putting the water and the salts back into their body, can stop a child from dehydrating and dying from that cause, diarrhoea. It costs less than a postage stamp, yet for so many children, such treatment is unavailable. It astounds me that we have over 400 million copies of Harry Potter books translated into 67 different languages to children around the world, but yet it seems that we can't get basic medical supplies like oral hydration salts to our children, the world's most marginalised and disadvantaged. The basic needs of mothers and children are simply just not prioritised, and this much must change. Do they not count? I believe that we have a real opportunity, we in the developed, the affluent nations, an opportunity to bring about an end to these millions of needless and preventable deaths if we work together. As we have already heard tonight, progress is possible. There have been a number of steps in the right direction, particularly as governments come together to work for the common good, something so inspirational, and meeting the Millennium Development Goals. I believe if we want to achieve change, to achieve a better world, it's up to us as representatives from a cross-section of a good society to get behind this issue and demand better health for mothers and children, not accept the fact that children are still dying from preventable diseases and that there is no longer an issue for children in the West, and that'll do us. Not good enough. We cannot accept that a mother in the developing world puts her life and the life of her baby at risk simply by giving birth. And of course, the more of the children die, the more they have more and more babies. So the tragedy continues in order, though, to get 1 or 2 living children. World Vision's global health campaign, Child Health Now, is one way we can use our voices to make a difference. The campaign is aiming to bring together a range of stakeholders, governments, civil society, the corporate sector, and other non-government organisations to hold world leaders accountable to their commitments under the Millennium Development Goals. So I urge you to get behind this campaign. It has a nobility about it. In fact, we can start tonight by signing World Vision's global petition, which is on your chair, calling for world leaders to make maternal and child health a political priority. For more information about becoming a Child Health Now supporter, there's also a small brochure on the chairs in which you can find out more and go to World Vision's website, childhealthnow.com.au. This may be a World Vision campaign, but it is aiming to facilitate greater collaboration and cooperation amongst so many stakeholders, and it is about a better and more just world from which every one of us surely will benefit. So World Vision will be joining coalitions and partners within the NGO organisations who are campaigning on the same issue. 8.1 million children are looking to us for help. We can all make a difference. Together, we can put an end to those preventable deaths. It isn't hard. We've just got to get together and do it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those powerful words delivered in such a gracious manner. And you're right, it is a human rights issue. We must never forget that. This Child Health Now Forum is the 28th in the national One Just World series. Video of tonight's speakers will be available on the website shortly, so you can see or listen to all the forums in the series. There's some 100 speakers, each of them experts in their field. If you've registered tonight or via the website for updates, you'll get an email whenever a new video is added. You can also add comments about the issues and suggested ideas for future forums. We'd really appreciate that. One Just World is not just about providing an opportunity to hear interesting perspectives or about stimulating discussions and ideas. It's also about thinking about what we can do to build a more just and equitable future. On behalf of the International Women's Development Agency, AusAid, the University of Melbourne, the University of Sydney and World Vision Australia, thank you so much for coming along tonight. Please take a moment to give us some feedback via the evaluation form that Professor Marie Bashir suggested so we can keep on doing it better. Thank you so much and good night.